Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me for another episode of the More Than You See podcast, where I have meaningful conversations with creatives about their mental health journeys. Please note, I am not a licensed practitioner or therapist, but a filmmaker and an actor who is deeply interested in sharing my own struggles and exploring the mental health of others. My hope is that these conversations bring you some joy, some personal understanding, and some tools so that you can build your own mental health toolbox. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the podcast. I am so excited to have my dear friend and a repeat guest of the podcast, Shelley, here with us today. Shelley was on episode 2.10, so season 2, episode 10 of the podcast. And on that podcast, we really talked about her booking this really huge film franchise, which you definitely have heard about. We are just currently still on strike while I'm recording this, so I can't mention it. But if you check her out with the link in the bio, then you'll be able to definitely recognize her and recognize all of the incredible work that she's done. So we really talked on that episode about how she booked this incredible, huge, life-changing opportunity, and then what happens after that, and how your just life and identity and the change that happens in yourself and your mental health, how to try and evolve from booking something big to then not knowing what you're doing next. We really talked about the roller coaster of Hollywood in that first episode. And in this episode, I really wanted to touch base with her again to talk some more about how she's doing, and to really talk about the tools that she has learned and have developed over time in order to continue, traveling on her mental health journey. She talks very openly about her experience with medication, about OCD, about panic attacks, about being um, someone who is known in Hollywood and how that can affect your mental health. I am just so honored that she is with us today. And I think that we both talk about some things that kind of blew my mind a little bit, like definitely some big knowledge bombs. So I hope that you enjoy this episode as much as I did recording it. Hi, Shelley. How are you?
I'm good. How are you, Miss Deborah?
I'm good. I'm so glad to have you here.
I'm so glad to be back.
Yeah, I was going to say you are my second repeat guest.
Woohoo!
And I'm so excited because, one of the things that was really important to me is that when I have repeat guests, I want to make sure that there's different perspectives and different something new that you're going to share. And I know that with my first repeat guest, she kind of talked about the transition between being an actor and then becoming a nutritionist. And then now she's transitioned into this whole other I feel like life coach has a really bad rap and it's a terrible connotation, but that's kind of what she does, but in a much greater holistic but scientific way. And so it was so fascinating to talk to her also about how much her life has changed since we talked a couple years
It's
ago.
really interesting too to hear that pivot from acting to that, more of a holistic or a nutrition base or life coaching um, arena. Cause I feel like, just in obviously there's new things to talk about. We've, since 2020, so much has happened and not happened. And I think when people are forced to sit down, all of a sudden you're just taking into account, what do I really want? What am I happy with? What am I not? That creates all kinds of mental health issues and worries and breakdowns and things like that, where I think for myself, it's been most people were like, let's just get back, let's get back to what we're doing in life or get back to work. But especially in the acting field, and now we're in a strike where it's like, well, there's not much to get back to.
Oh,
And for someone in my lens, I do very well, in isolation and alone, but I also know that it's sort of detrimental for me. And so been trying to push pull between well, there's nothing to really get out of the house for, yet I know I need to get out of the house. I know I should get out of the house. What's my purpose? Oh no, the world is on fire and it's flooding. And But it is interesting to hear. I myself kind of will have those thoughts of like, is this career what I really still want to be doing? And then all of a sudden you get something that says, oh, yes, I love this. I'll keep going. And it's those little dangling carrots, but kind of in between time. And I think probably people, like myself in their mid 30s, when you realize, oh, I'm not 22 anymore. And I could have a more well-rounded scope of what my life can look like, just not just these very specific staunch lanes of like it has to look like this. My identity is right here, and this is where I have to go, and I can't move out of any of that. Uh, when the reality is everything's changing, everything evolves, and I think for people that deal with a lot of the mental health struggles, that's you know none of us are great with change, but
Sure.
there are people that grip a little more tightly to the safety zone or the comfort zone. And, how do you relinquish that control? That's my mantra of the year. Like, how are we relinquishing the control that we don't have over most things?
Yes. Good for you. Well, so how are you doing today? What's your mental health check-in today?
Yes. I had a little cry. No. No, mental health check-in today is good. I think it's important for someone like me. I'm kind of learning to trust my own voice a little more, figure out what that voice is, when that voice gets scared or when that voice is listening to too many other voices around her. And it's easier to talk about it like in third person, really,
For sure.
because then it sort of separates that
Fun.
that connection to it, right? Um, but today I'm doing good. I find that uh, all my stuff is like less thinking, more doing, less thinking, more doing.
Yep.
Mornings, I'm not just never been a great morning person
Yep.
for as long as I have been around. I love to sleep in. I hate alarm clocks. I mean, who likes them?
Right.
But I just was never the person that could like hear the alarm and be like, my brain's awake, time to get up. Why don't we start the day? I just always, strung along. So I'm really working on being disciplined
Right.
in such a simple task that most of us have learned throughout life. But like, I was always tardy for school. Like, I almost didn't graduate because I had too many tardies. I don't understand why school needs to start at 7:30. It makes
Yeah.
no sense to me. What are we doing? I don't need to go to algebra at
Right.
7:30. And guess what? I haven't used any of that
Right.
since the time I graduated. That's
Same.
another podcast. That's another
I'd
tangent.
say. So what do you
Um,
do? Because like you've been on big sets, and I know we can't like specifically name them because we're currently it's still in the strike,
right.
unfortunately. But look Shelly up, or listen to the other podcast that she did.
Yes.
Talk
There
all
might be some tidbits to what I've done in the past.
For sure, and I think, we talked a lot about on that podcast about, like, your transition from, like, booking this huge thing that is, like, international acclaim, and then your career just kinda going, "Er," and, like, figuring out how to handle that, and, like, yeah, like, how you navigate that when, like, everything seems to be going super, super great, and then that stops. So, like, that's definitely something, and, of course, tidbits of that will certainly creep into this conversation, but go listen to the other podcast episodes so you can get Kelly's whole, life story with that. But like, so you've been on really big sets. What do you do? Like when you have to
That's
wake
the
up
part.
for
If I have to anything, or if I have to be accountable to a job or another person, it's minus school for some reason. I was like, I just don't care. But yeah, I think it's that thing of like, if I really want to be there, if I want to do, I don't know. There's almost like if there's a consequence to it, oh, I might lose my job or I could, not get paid or whatever. If I have to, I can get up. It doesn't matter. I worked at a gym and I was the opener at 5 a.m. and I could get up. Now, mind you, I was rushing to,
right,
it's like wasn't great to get up at 4 in the morning,
right,
and I rush, and yet sometimes it was like, I don't know how I'm even driving myself there. I'm still waking up. But yeah, if I have to, it's the I don't have to think about it. I just do.
Mhm.
But I think it's more along the lines of when I don't have set things in my day, and really just this idea, which is kind of, I think, I don't know, I can't speak for everybody's experience. What I assume a lot of people have is like an accountability to themselves.
Mm,
Um, that I think mine is a bit flipped of I can be really accountable to so many things outside of myself. But when it comes down to, me and what I need or what I want, I get caught in this mess of like, well, what's really the consequence
right.
of, snoozing the alarm a few times or whatever.
The pandemic must have been really hard for you.
Oh no, the pandemic was great for me.
Really? Interesting.
Yeah, it's weird. It's interesting of like because there were no everybody was doing it.
Right.
We're all in the same boat. So we're all, we could stay up till 3 in the morning. We could sleep whenever we wanted to, get up whenever we wanted to. None of it matters because we're all having to, stay
Self-med
inside and do this thing. Um, and but it was more of like, okay, now we're creeping back into society again and uh doing other things, and it was like, oh wait, well, hold on, we don't want to keep just hanging out doing the things. Not Yeah, it's there's a weird I'm learning currently of how much pressure I actually put on myself. And so I think there's almost this idea of, I don't know, for lack of better words, like abandoning yourself, kind of abandoning your self responsibility so that I don't have to deal with any consequences or I just get overwhelmed. And so I get into like procrastination station and, not making any moves seems safer than doing something. And it just kind of wraps you into this stuck cycle. Um, where on the outside, you're kind of like, well, yeah, just do something different. But whatever that internal monologue that's going on in one's brain
right.
or the feelings attached to a story, it's so interesting where it's like, sounds simple, not as simple, but you just got to do it. And you got to not pay attention to certain voices or stories in your head and charge on. I don't know. It's so vague, but people that get it, they'll get it.
Oh, for sure. And so, like, I know that, that this year has been rough for you on
Yes.
in the mental health
Yes.
capacity in a lot of ways, and I'm curious, like, I know that you're starting to come out of it, and I think part of that is that, you have a new job, which we can talk about because it's not a SAG production, it's a equity
Right.
theater production.
Equity theater.
Woo! So I'm very excited to see
I
you
am
in
too.
December. Um,
Yes.
you should give a little shout out to
It is. Yes. I will be in A Christmas Story, the musical at the Ahmanson Theatre in downtown Los Angeles. And it's going to be all of December, December 5th through 31st. And it's going to be a lot of fun. And yeah, it's busy toward the end of the year, but it's going to be great. I'm so excited to get back on stage. And this is my first love. So, and, I don't think that will ever go away. So I'm very excited.
yeah, that's awesome. And so,
Yeah.
like, I know that mentally for you as you booked this and are starting to, like, mentally prepare for the long rehearsals and the multiple show days and, like, all of that kinda stuff that, like, you've certainly brightened and lightened and are, like, doing, like, some like, it's really wonderful to see, um, that side of yourself come out again.
Yes.
But I'm curious, like, when this ends in December and, going into the next year, is there anything that you've learned about yourself that you're like, "Okay, I now know that I need to do X come next year in order to not spiral the way that you have this year.
Oh, definitely. I think I get really caught in kind of this like moral obligation, rumination of like, basically what's right and wrong choices. My brain gets very black and white thinking like that. And it's, which causes a lot of uh undue pressure on myself because we're living life. Life is messy. There are no right choices. Even if you make a quote unquote wrong choice, it always leads to the right choice for you. And so for me, there's definitely, I'm realizing like a lot of goal orientation that probably needs to be set more for myself. And that kind of comes with sitting down and asking what you really want. And I think a lot of people, myself included, don't like when you really put up that mirror, like, what do I really want?
Mhm,
It's hard to answer.
mhm,
I sit in a very, very privileged and fortunate seat that, like, I don't have to go to a full-time 9 to 5 job. I don't have children's mouths to feed. I don't, I have a very great life that warrants the like, you can do mostly anything you want to do. And there's kind of this interesting paralysis that comes with that freedom in my lens because if the options are that open, I don't know what to choose or where to go and it's kind of comes back on that self responsibility of like, well, what if I choose something and I don't like it or it doesn't work out or all these, it sounds so silly sitting in and I only say this because, kind of wrapping back to this year of, um, I was having some really debilitating, panic attacks, and so I think that kind of created a story in myself of maybe I'm not as strong as I think I am. Just all these false narratives of like, I wouldn't be crying and crumpled on the floor, or like having all of these internal fears or whatever that feel uncontrollable if I was stronger or better or XYZ. And the only way you prove, you know, the truth or otherwise to yourself is by doing it, kind of the Brene Brown of it all of like get in the arena because you're gonna mess it up no matter what. But to wrap back to your question of in the new year of when the work is done and kind of normal life sets back in when you're not as busy. I think what's really important for me is goal setting, both like short term and long term of so that I can check off lists and be able to have like data and proof of you're doing things. You're working on, something every day to attain a certain goal, be it career or financial or relationship, social. And yeah, and I think for me, it's just kind of getting back in that mindset, not victim mindset of like, oh no, something bad happened, or you kind of fell in a hole. Um, we pick ourselves up, we keep going, and we're not a victim to our circumstances. We can do it.
yeah. It's so interesting because, I mean, people are so fascinating, and this is why I love talking to people, and
Yes.
especially, like, creatives who are so willing to share of themselves so freely. But it's so interesting because it's like, you describing your paralysis with like too many options. And so therefore having like less options because you've predetermined like what are the things I'm going to do today, I'm going to do this year, I'm going to do whatever, and then you've got those markers that you're, hitting. And so it's like everything else becomes less important and becomes about those markers. And I can totally see how for you that would be so valuable. And
Yes.
then the first episode of the podcast, I talked to a friend, and actually the episode that's coming out this week is the same, talking to a friend about how lists have become a crutch and have become a negative thing because then
Oh,
it's like
interesting.
because then it's like, feeling like you become so stuck in like, this is what I have to do in order to succeed. And then
Mm,
not being willing to look outside of the box in order to like not look at the lists. And I would say like I definitely fluctuate between the two. Like some days I'm like, I need my lists and I need to know that I have to accomplish these things. And some days like I can feel that the list is like sapping my creativity and I need to like let that go. And
yes.
and of course, like I think it's so valuable to know for yourself, like I'm feeling like this right now because of the past experience that I've had this year and because of how I'm, anticipating, my feelings in the future and just like building those systems for yourself. Like that's really valuable and I think interesting for any listener to be like, okay, I'm going to take pieces of this in order to figure out how it works for myself. And I think that, you know, I'm a huge advocate for self awareness and self advocacy when it comes to mental health. And so I kind of want to pivot to talk about how you've really had to stand up for yourself and advocate for yourself
Mm,
with your own mental health journey, because I know that, we talked in the first episode about you growing up in the South and how, like, that is not, mental health awareness is definitely not something that you grew up with. And so, really having to, um, advocate for yourself in order to get the help that you need. And you've continued to have to do so in order to continue supporting yourself on this like very creative, erratic journey that
yeah.
us are on. And so I want to really commend you for that. I know that you've had points where it's been really difficult, but I think it's
Mm,
so incredible that you just like keep trying to figure things out. You're like, this isn't working. Like how can I figure out how this works better? You
yeah.
know, that's really, really
And
valuable.
thank you. I really appreciate that. And I think, for me, it's that thing of, and why I love to talk about it and why I feel like it's so important to share these experiences. And this has always been my why is for anyone else who does feel stigmatized or doesn't feel like they're in a safe space to speak about what's going on internally in their heads or in their bodies, is just to feel less alone. I think there is, very a varied spectrum of mental health. Some people, and we all have our own coping skills of how to deal with things. None of this is new. I was just I've been kind of going through a big learning curve in the OCD spectrum, which I'm realizing I deal a lot more in that lane than I ever actually realized growing up. And I thought to myself, there's a lot of information and new information, and there's still so much that people don't know about obsessive compulsive disorder, those who even deal with it themselves. Um, and, but I'd seen something of like, when women were getting like lobotomies and, my gosh, what was that? Like the 50s, 60s, and 70s. And it was to treat anxiety and OCD. And I was like, okay, none of this is new.
Right.
We all in some varying degrees deal with these issues.
Sure.
And that's why I feel like it's so important to talk about, because when you feel like you're the only one, when you look out and go, gosh, must be bananas, or I'm the only one that deals with this, or these crazy thoughts, or whatever. It's just completely not true. Some people are just better at hiding it. Some people are better at coping with it. Um, but I just feel like it's so important to be real and vulnerable about it, because when you sort of are navigating it, it is a single person's journey, but we can all do it together. We can all support each other in it, because what's going to work for me is not going to work for the next person and the next person after that. We all have to find what individually will work for our own safety, uh and health. But the support system can be there, and just to know that, like, oh my gosh, I don't have to judge myself so harshly on being a person that has doubts and fears and anxieties. um that doesn't mean I'm bad. That doesn't mean, I'm crazy. It just means I've got either more brain activity sometimes that just kind of keeps rapid firing, or just a normal person. It's all normal. It's just varying degrees of it all. So, but I thank you. I really love talking about it. I love the advocacy of it. It makes me feel less alone when I hear other people speaking about their journeys, and I think that's kind of what we're all here to do, in some form of like reflect to one another what we're all going through.
Sure. Yeah. So I want to specifically ask you about your advocacy when it comes to medication, because I know that you've been on medication for a while, but there was a point recently in which that medication stopped working or changed, and you had to really like advocate for yourself in order to be like, no, this is not working. I need to find something that works for me again. So I'd love to hear a little more about that.
Yeah, of course. So I've been on the generic Zoloft. It's called sertraline. I had been taking that for 20 plus years of my life. And I was on the highest dosage, which is 200 milligrams. And for majority of my entire upbringing, and I say that I probably started this when I was like 12 or 13 years old. I'm 34 now. I'm not ashamed to admit my age in Hollywood. Um, but that's a significant amount of time. Um, to be on anything. I was told, I have a chemical imbalance in my brain, and I deal with anxiety and OCD, but I didn't know what any of that meant, when I was diagnosed young. And so about 3 or 4 years ago, I was starting to have more consistent panic attacks again, which was kind of the main reason I had gotten on medication, was because I was having these horrific panic attacks as a kid. And I thought to myself, I was working with my psychiatrist, and I said, "Oh, these panic attacks are coming up more often again. Maybe we should think about going up on my dosage of medicine." And I was informed that I was already on the highest dose of medication and I could not go any further. And so that just started the questions for me of, well, if I'm already on the highest dose and it's supposed to fix the problem, what am I doing here? Because the problem that this was supposed to help is now coming back up. It's being more consistent. I got myself back into talk therapy, and, wasn't suppressing my emotions so much, and really worked through a lot of things, and it was helping a lot. And so I thought, well, I'd like to try and lower my medicine dosage, because if it wasn't working fully at the highest dosage, maybe I could do more holistic practices and more mindfulness and self aware practices with a lower dosage. Maybe I could do this completely medicine free. It was a really exciting idea to me that maybe I didn't need medication. Um, and I never had a judgment about medication. I was always very open to people, to friends, or, you go to when you were a kid and you have to tell parents or whatever, I take this medicine, please don't let me forget. Um, but it was exciting. I thought maybe there's this whole new journey I could take without medication. What could that be like? And how might my body change, and my mental, that my mindset change? And but my psychiatrist had told me, and mind you, we were in the pandemic, and she wasn't willing to start going down on medication for very good professional reasons. Um, and I had asked twice, I'd like to, go down on my medicine. And I was basically told no, both times. And it just didn't feel right to me. It kind of felt like, well, no one else can be the authority over my decision but me. And this is what I'm wanting to try. And why are we not willing to see what that could be? So, um, what I don't recommend truly is is taking matters into your own hands, which is the lesson I learned. I did. I dropped down to about 100 milligrams, which would not be recommended professionally, but it worked really well for me. And so I was on half my dosage than I'd been on for the last 20 something years. And I was thriving. I felt more clarity. I was realizing the higher dose in medication kind of made suppressed me a little bit more. It made me feel, in my own terms, hazy. Um, and so I was really excited, and I was like, I was right. I'm on the right track. I knew I could trust my body, and I knew what I knew. Um, and so I decided to rapid fire, basically go down, taper down very quickly in about 2 weeks to zero medication. And about 3 months later, I had significant withdrawals. My body chemistry obviously was going through a change. I didn't have that specific coping mechanism to combat how my brain operates versus my reactions to thoughts that worry me, or just worry in general. And so I went very quickly back into very debilitating panic attacks, and which created a narrative for myself that I made the wrong choice. That was really stupid. Everything I've ever feared is actually the truth. And uh, you know, I don't know how to make any of my own decisions. I can't trust myself. It just kind of everything just kind of flipped on its head. Um, and so, but within all that, I advocated for myself of, this isn't working. This is no way to live. I need to get back to the doctor. Um, we need to I need to get stabilized so that if I do want to try less or no medication again in the future, I need to do that with a professional, do that in the right way, make sure I've got other tools in my belt, to make sure that any type of withdrawal symptoms, or um, anything that could arise, I could combat that in a more holistic way. Or I'm gonna be on medicine for the rest of my life, as I was told, when I was young. All of it is okay. But yeah, I'm definitely much more in like a stable mode, uh, trying to figure out what dosage is gonna work well for me right now, trying to uh, not be as judgmental of needing the medication, which I never was before. But I think I can more understand now, um, the judgment that I think other people have. I think there's a judgment where you don't want to need medicine.
Right.
You don't, I wish I was, stronger than this, or I wish I didn't need that, or other people don't need it. I must be XYZ, enter negative comment about yourself. But I sort of have come to think of it as, there are things we can do for ourselves, um, holistically, to keep up with our health. But I wouldn't I wouldn't blame a person who has diabetes, or who has uh, cancer, or who has uh, a virus.
Right.
I wouldn't blame them for needing to take medication to get better or to help along the journey. And so that's kind of how I view it now, or I'm reviewing it again. Of medicine is just part of the toolbox. I think the mistake is making it the only part of the toolbox and relying on it as the fix to the problem.
For sure. And I think also this, again, like talking about stigma, because of course, like, mental health has come so far, even from when I started, like the website More Than You See, which was like 4 years ago now. Like
Yeah.
it's changed vastly the conversation, which is incredible.
Yeah.
Uh, But I mean, I think, there's 2 pieces that are still very stigmatized and people don't talk about: suicide and medication. And I think that both of those things are things that we should be talking about all the time.
Mhm.
Um, I grew up with a family member, close family member, who's bipolar. 2 family members actually who are bipolar. And so I grew up watching them feel really good. They were on medication, feel really, really good on their medication, go off their medication because they felt great, and then crash and have some kind of manic episode, and then go on medication again, and then crash, and then, like, and it was just a constant up and down, up and down. And I think so much of that was the stigma that they felt around the medication that they were taking, and that, like, for them, it 100% is something that they just need to take
Yeah.
consistently for the rest of their life. Um, and also just the fact that, like, there wasn't like, they were the only 2 people I knew that had that experience and
Yeah.
that were on medication like that.
Yeah.
And I'm sure that that's not the case. I'm sure that there was more people within my circle that have that.
Yeah.
Um, and so I just really commend you for speaking openly about it, because I think that, like, it's it's so wonderful that, like, you have both the self-awareness and the support system that you're able to, when you went off the medication, to be like, "Okay," and once the panic attacks just started again in full force, to be
Yeah.
like, "Okay, this was clearly a bad idea. I need to figure out how to, figure out how to, figure this out."
Yeah.
Um, and it's so, wonderful that, like, you have that, because some people don't. And some people then, like, that is the point where, they would feel, hopeless and, potentially, die by suicide or something like that. I
Yes.
think that's when those kinds of, things happen, because we we don't understand ourselves because we're not listening to other people understanding themselves. And I think that,
Mm.
or that we
Wait, say that again.
that we don't understand ourselves because we're not listening to other people understanding themselves. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that it's, like, really beautiful that you do, and that you do also in your art. And
Mm.
I mean, I think this is
Well,
why
I try. I think that's the thing of like, as soon as you think, I've got it, I've figured it out, I've understood things, something else is like, I understand nothing.
of
None
course.
of this makes sense. But it is all the trial by fire. And I think it is a very scary place to be. When I know that I'm at base not a person that feels hopeless or despair, but I have felt those things.
Right.
And so when I am in that very scary place, which none of us like to be in, but we have all felt somehow, some way, that kind of pain. But it's that thing of like, I'm very aware, and it is that self-awareness of like, you can't stay there very long, and that's the fight that I feel. I think a lot of people in mental health, we really just don't give ourselves enough credit, because kind of at base, you're just constantly feeling like you're in that fight and it's never going to end and all that stuff. But, you have to remember, okay, I have to tell myself, I'm not in the same fight I was in 7 months ago. That was a completely different fight and I got through it. Now I'm in this kind of fight of just wanting to feel a little more, alive and uh free, rather than allowing certain fear or worry to uh loom over me. And it's like, well, that's a very normal, fight. That's a very justified, oh, okay, that has certain steps we can take. But
Yeah.
when you feel like you're on that very end of the spectrum where like nothing's working, nothing will work, nothing will get better, it's a terrifying place to be. And it takes the power in yourself and a community around you. I definitely don't think I would have done it as well if I didn't have my friendships. Like you, we went on a hike and it's like, my gosh, we both cried together on a hike. Like, you need friends like that. I have a wonderful partner who is here for me in all of this mess that I'm still trying to accept. How? you know? Um, and yeah, so it is. It's very, very important. But I'm always trying to preach of like, if you need help, ask for help. Find somebody who will listen if the people around you are gaslighting you or blowing it off. Um it's when
Yeah.
something's off, something is off, find
Well,
it.
I think that's such an important distinction. The fact, like, that you said that, like, your baseline is not hopelessness, and that when that we yes, it's true. We all slip into those periods. And I think that, like, the statistics are something like 90% of people have had suicidal ideations. And it's like, yes, because everyone has moments where they feel like nothing's going to get better and at that pit of despair.
Mhm.
That is part of being human and feeling a full range of emotions.
Mhm.
But if the pit of despair is your normal, that's when it's so important for someone to then go speak to a professional about potentially, if this person professional thinks so, a different kind of medication that helps them
Yeah.
with that. Because, like, that's also a chemical imbalance in the brain as far as, um, feeling like you're in that perilous state because
Yeah.
our bodies are not built like that. I think, like, it's so important for us to always remember that, like, we're humans or we're animals. And so, like, our
Yeah.
baseline is still, like, normal, like, some kind of foundational normal with fight or flight that,
Yes.
causes us to react to different things in our lives and have heightened senses because of whatever is making us feel anxious,
Yeah.
sad, or whatever those things. But, like, the baseline should still just be, like, functional, neutral, whatever. And if that isn't the neutral, it's important to figure out, like, why. And, that's when it's like, is it an environmental factor? Is it a like, relationships factor? Is it a chemical factor? Like, there's so many different aspects of mental health
Right.
and of, like, how we show up in the world and
Yeah.
how we feel. And I think that's just, like, such an important thing for you to realize. And I think it also is important to recognize that, like, you made the choice to go off your medication, and part of that is because I would assume you aren't someone whose baseline was, like, depression and, like, that was not your baseline. And I think that,
Right.
like, if it was, potentially you would not have been like, "I should go off this medication because, like,
Right. Right.
idea." But, like, because you were like, "No, I think I've got this. Like, I'm feeling good." And I'm like, like, and I think that, like, um that, like, conscious awareness again of, like, how you were showing up. And so, I hope that no one listening is like, "I'm gonna go off medication," but it's like,
That's
it's
why
so
I always say, I'm like, I did make that decision.
right,
And in hindsight, that was a poor decision
right.
to make.
Sure.
Please talk to your professionals. Or what probably I should have done is just continued to advocate for myself or get more understanding and clarity of why my psychiatrist was telling me no. Because I took it as like, you think you know more than what I'm feeling rather than hearing the scientific data of like, here's why that's not a good idea in the way you want to do it. How can we compromise?
For
They
sure.
are there to work with you. And
Troubleshoot.
that's why it's so important to find a doctor and a psychiatrist who you vibe with, who does listen, who does take into account. It's kind of hard in our healthcare system today because so many people, are. I mean, that's why we have all of these online uh
Platform.
meetings and yeah, platforms where because so many people need to talk to someone or need medication, and the doctors are just trying to keep up with the demand. So it is kind of difficult to really have that connection other than, how you feeling? You doing good? Okay, how's the medicine? Okay, see you in 2 months. But that's why it's important on our side to go, I know that that's part of the job, but if I need to keep you here an extra 5 minutes, that's what we're gonna have to do, you know? And but it's that's something to learn as well, you know? I didn't do that
Right.
when that opportunity was presented. Would I do that now? Yes, because I've learned. So, again, even through the tumble and the pitfall, that's why, there's I a podcast I listened to, and I basically heard the phrase of like, finish the story, and I kind of, that's a mantra that I like to grab onto when things feel too hard or hopeless or something. It's like, you know what? This isn't the end of the story. Why don't you finish the story and see where it lands?
Yeah.
We don't stop a movie at the height of the conflict and be like, well, that must be it for that character.
Right.
It's like, finish the movie, see where it landed, see what they learned. It's the same thing that we're all going through.
Yeah, that's such a wonderful metaphor. I love that.
Yeah.
So going to, your other things that you do in order to help yourself, like besides lists, what are some other things that you found that have been really beneficial as far as your tools?
Well, the comical part of it right now is that it's everything I don't instinctively want to do.
Mm,
I'm really understanding the difference of like discipline,
mm,
which create, disciplined action to create a better outcome for my mental health, such as working out,
mm,
waking up when I say I'm going to wake up and not thinking about it and going to class or going for a walk, not laying in bed and hoping I feel better in 5 minutes to then start my day. Um, and sort of building these new habits, kind of in the way where it's like when you don't think about, we just get up and we brush our teeth. When we were kids, we didn't want to do that, but now it's just a habit forming. So working out, I mean, it's just clear, proven data. It just works.
uh,
Every time I work out, my gosh, 10 minutes after I'm done with a 30-minute or a 45-minute movement, the endorphins kick in. I feel like I'm, kind of the visualization in my head is like I'm so above the water where I'm like the things that tend to bother me just don't matter. You're like, "Oh, that okay. I understand the importance of this." Gratitude lists have made their way to a top priority for me because it's just that reminder of you're doing better than you think. There's so much to be grateful for amidst whatever hard thing that you're dealing with. Um, and, you know, connection is huge for me. I think a lot of, I think a lot of people that deal with mental health issues, it's easier to want to isolate. I know one of the things that ticks in my head is that nobody else wants to deal with this. And so it's easier for me to just shut myself out until I feel better. And the lie of it all is that people want to deal with every aspect of you. And what you think people don't want to deal with is actually no one's really even thinking
yeah,
that you're presenting that at all. It's like, oh, are you sad? Oh, I've been sad too. Oh, I had a bad day. All of a sudden you're connecting again. And then you feel better because you've made a connection. So it's like the thing I would want to do is hide away, but actually it's probably better for me to reach out to a friend and just ask how they're doing. Um, and I'm trying a lot more to kind of get into more like volunteer work or just work that helps get me outside of myself. 'cause I tend to get in this space where I'm like, I'm just over myself. I'm overthinking about myself. I'm over trying to figure out what I need to do to, feel this way or that way. Can I go help somebody else? And that just gives you a different sense of purpose and a different sense of gratitude. Um, yeah, so it's definitely those things that I think instinctively we're feels like work.
Right.
But I heard someone else describe it as bliss discipline, where it's
Mm,
like it's discipline that creates kind of that bliss in your life.
my God, I love that.
Yeah.
I'm 100% gonna take that.
And on top of all that, I'm still in therapy. I find a good therapist. And I'm actually learning a lot in the OCD world of the exposure and response. There's certain types of therapy for specifically OCD that is kind of the opposite of normal talk therapy. It's basically like it's basically going toward your fear and sitting with your fear versus reassuring that the fear is not going to happen or that, make yourself feel better. Um, so it's very interesting. I'm learning so much about it. It all fascinates me, this kind of encapsulates acting and psychology and all that, why we were really into this and our own lived experiences. I just eat this stuff up and, learning about people and the brain and our behaviors. It's just wild and crazy and messy.
That's awesome. I have one more question for you.
Yeah.
But, and I know that, like, it's always, like, an ever evolving thing, mental health journeys, but
Yeah.
what would you say is your, like, dream, like, feeling for yourself or, like, your dream goal as far as mental health? Like, what do you strive for?
Oh, wow. That's a great question. I think if I'm completely 100% honest, I think I'm grappling with the fact that I think the goal used to be and probably still is to never feel these bad feelings again. But now I think that's really evolving into developing the true self trust to know that no matter how scary or bad or negative things can get internally, that I have the confidence and the strength to power through, to make it through,
Mm,
to know that maybe to just not let it affect me
yeah,
as much as it has in the past.
yeah,
And it's a hard cycle, or it feels like a hard cycle to break. And I think that's kind of where, as humans, we have such a complex mind because we remember the bad things. And so our bodies decide, oh, we don't want that to happen. So we go into a survival mechanism to prevent said bad thing from happening. But the reality is that's just a false way of living because we don't have any control of what's going to come next. And so I think it's really to really fully embody that trust within myself that no matter what, I got it. Yeah. And not waver on questioning myself as much. Yeah.
yeah, that's awesome. That's
Yeah.
beautiful.
Yeah.
Got
So we'll
it.
see. Yeah. In the next few seasons, we'll see what see
Yeah,
how she's doing on that.
definitely. You're gonna be, like, my consistent, just, like, check-in guest.
Yes, yes, I would love to be. You're like, "I've learned something new. Here's what we're doing."
Yeah, it's wonderful. Thank you
Yeah.
so much for talking to me and everyone.
Always, always.
Thanks again so much for listening to this episode of the podcast. I hope that you enjoyed listening to it as much as we enjoyed recording it. Thank you, Shelley, for being so open and so vulnerable with everyone. And I think that, I certainly learned some things about myself and about her. And I hope that you have some little tidbits that you're going to take with you as well. I want to thank my incredible editor of the podcast and a friend of mine, Keitra Parkman, as well as the composer for the opening and closing music, Ryan Ricks at Salt and Sea Studios. Thank you so much for being such an active listener of the podcast. If you are listening, I super appreciate it. Please rate and review and subscribe and all of the things. It really does help spread the word of mouth. And most importantly, please remember to be kind to yourself this week. Please remember that you and everyone around you is more than you see. Thank you so much for listening, and I'll see you next week.